Hey, it's Amethyst Virgo. Thank you for everyone who watched the first Lilith video where I went through Lilith through the signs. If you have not yet watched that video, I suggest you watch that one first because it's going to walk you through the origin of Lilith and also talk about how to find your four Liliths, okay? Now in that video, I do say that for most people, the easiest way to start is going to be with the Black Moon Lilith. So finding where that is in your chart is going to be really helpful. And then you can move on to the other Lilith placements. And in that video and also in my blog post, I have links and I explain how to find your different Lilith placements. Now, finding your different Lilith placements will assist you in understanding kind of the trajectory of your sense of freedom, how you may have experienced, where in your life have you experienced the level of denial of self or feeling denied by society or other people, feeling betrayed, feeling, casted aside, and then also what ways in which you have sought to rebel, build yourself back up in order to seek empowerment. So to fully understand Lilith's journey, you probably would need to understand all four, understand your own chart fully, interpret it fully, because everything in the chart is linked, and once you understand someone's theme of the chart, then everything else in interpretation becomes easier, which is why sometimes it's hard for me to answer certain questions without doing readings, because to me, I might see that you have a yacht, or I might see that you have a kite in your chart. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. Or I might see that something is semi-square and it's semi-square something else, and it's trying, like I might see something that helps me look at the bigger picture. So, so sometimes it's hard because again, everything is thematic. What's the theme of your chart? And how does Lilith fit into that, right? So I'm gonna go through the houses right now and talk a little bit about the area of life that you might see this Lilith energy come into place. Again, it is important to really go through all of your Liliths, okay? So for example, Lilith in the first house. We always look at the first house as self, as identity. It's the self that you're proclaiming. Of course, there are more things to your identity, but this is what you're proclaiming, or this is your journey to self-discovery, right? First house energy we know was ruled by Mars, so this sometimes has to do also with the physical representation of you, your body as well, your physical self. So what I said about Lilith in the first house, and again I'm looking up because I wrote my notes on my computer, but that this sometimes a person can have an issue with the body they're in, or the image they have, or the image they have to portray. Sometimes it can feel forced on the person, or the person struggles to really understand how it represents who they are. It could be a person who actually looks like they're happy, but on the outside they feel like they've always had to conform to certain standards of what they should look like, or what they should be, or who they are. The person who's treated like a model, but they just want to be left alone because they're actually introverted. But they get all this attention for the physical appearance, so they decide they have to be that, and it keeps them locked into a certain mode until they learn to free themselves, right? This person could, this also could be defining self through appearance or what is visual. Or again, like I said, having to break free of that. So maybe you're a person who's like, you don't want to do that, but you feel, or it could be like what you are, what you look like. We're not always talking about beauty. We can have people who struggle with self-esteem, who struggled with something. And again, let's say you have something like Lilith and Aquarius in the first house, right? Conjunct Saturn or something like that, and maybe this person has struggled, maybe they've had the ugly duckling syndrome of where they felt unattractive earlier in their life, and they had to build up understanding it's okay to look different, it's okay to be different. What is different might actually be in a couple of years, okay? Right? When I was growing up, what was in were thin eyebrows. Now, I've never had thin eyebrows, okay? And I never tried to have thin eyebrows. Like, even when it was in to have thin eyebrows, I kept mine. Like, I would groom them, of course, but I never did that. Now, the point I'm trying to make is now it's in to have thick eyebrows and people kind of draw them on, but it's like I never changed that. If you see pictures of me when I was younger, I had thick, not thick, but like dark eyebrows that were pretty shaped. And when I was in middle school, high school, college, when it was in to have thinner eyebrows, I never felt that trend. I didn't like it on myself. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I don't like it on me. So the point I'm making is that the thing that is not in could be in a couple of years. And I think I've said this in another video, just about, embracing yourself, embracing what you like about yourself. We all are going to conform in some way, but we don't have to conform in such a way where we become other people. And we can like things about ourselves that aren't in or trendy. Now, the reason I brought that up is because like I said, if the person has certain placements in the first house already, or if there's squares to Lilith in other placements of the chart, that's why I said the whole chart's going to tell the picture. Because sometimes, I might not always go through aspects with Lilith, but if I see that someone has like 2 planets conjunct Lilith and something squaring Lilith, it's going to be more important for them, right? You're active in this need to define yourself. When you have Lilith in the first house, there's an active need to discover who you present as and how you show up in the world. And that sometimes is a trajectory of having to, learn to embrace yourself. And so the example again, as I say, Lilith in Aquarius, the first house, this person might need to define themselves. They might have they're experiencing or trying to figure out how to have liberation or how to experience liberation due to being rejected or due to having social norms enforced on them. And even if you're not a Lilith in Aquarius, the first house, I would always just think thematically about self-identity, body image, and how that relates to you. So again, it's going to look different for each person, but your Lilith in the first house represents those issues. Now the second house. Now the second house can be, what am I without my possessions? Like, what am I? This could be a person who maybe has had experiences where possessions were important or possessions were all they had. Maybe they'll say they have Saturn and Taurus conjunct Lilith and Taurus in the second house. So they come from like, a story of having to build themselves up. That is very typical of Saturn and Taurus. And maybe they have situations where growing up, they didn't have a lot, but they had this one thing, or growing up, they didn't have a lot of love, but they were always given things. And when they were given things, they felt that they were valuable. Now I'm valued. The person who's like, oh, my one parent, only showed love through gifts. Now, some people, I'll talk about that in another video, but sometimes some people give money or they give gifts because that's all they can give. They might have issues with their emotional attachment. They might not know how to show it. But the Lilith in the second house, there's going to typically be a theme. Now, again, if you have positive aspects to Lilith, there's probably not as much issues with this, of possessions, of belongings matter, and then you feeling like you have to have certain things. And it's not always about wanting to show off. This is a different energy. It's not a planet in the second house that produces a person who may want to show what they have. This is producing someone who clings to that as a sense of their self of value. This might be a person who clings to that because there's this feeling. Remember, Lilith cast it aside, having to build herself up. And so there could be this feeling of like, what am I without these things? Or what am I without possessions? What am I without attaining something? What am I without these things? And your journey might be learning how to embrace what is not seen, especially this person with Pisces energy in their chart, or they have some Sag energy in their chart, 9th house placements, 12th house placements, even 4th, maybe you're learning how to embrace things that aren't just physical, that aren't just monetary, right? And that might take journeys if you learn to link yourself to what you can get, what you can obtain, right? Sometimes that's, oh, this person gave me this, that means they care about me, or I'm only going to care about the money. I'm only going to care about the money and what I can get. But if your chart shows that you're actually supposed to learn something of more spiritual value, then that could be the lesson and theme that you go on, right? Because you have this idea that the physical world makes you who you are. And so you could sometimes see a person has a spiritual journey, right? Ironically, because, and again, there's a whole theory of charts and how they're set up and why some of us have certain placements, and how even your sun sign can, in some ways, support your journey, your north node. Where your planets are placed supports what you're supposed to do in this lifetime. That's a whole different conversation, but that's what Lilith in second. Now, Lilith in third is quite interesting. Third house energy, we're dealing with the thoughts, the communication, learning. Lilith in the third house, I think, is quite interesting. The way I choose to interpret it, the key word that comes to mind with me was consciousness, where I think that like Lilith in the third house, remember, it's such an objective house, it's Mercurian. So we're dealing with here, especially third and sixth house, in my opinion, there's some level of feeling tied to something. And with the third house, I think it's feeling tied to ideas and this kind of like objectivity, but not being able to fully feel that you are free, really, in body and spirit. It is this preoccupation with your thoughts and with thinking that it's the person who says everything, but they're not doing it. right? It's the person who believes they understand liberation, they understand themselves, they understand freeing themselves, they understand oppression, they understand all these things, but they're not doing it. Because when you put something in the third house that can be troublesome, Chiron, if you put Pluto there, and Pluto doesn't make any positive aspects to anything. If you put now Pluto in third isn't always bad. It depends on what you use it for. But Lilith there, if you put something there that can struggle, what you're basically doing is you're focusing now on this concept of like being so objective that sometimes you forget to feel. And so Lilith is about freedom, right? She's about freedom. But if the third house is about objectivity, now in a way, the third house is about the freedom of ideas creating, the initiation, the spark of ideas. But when we think of Lilith in the third house, we understand that Lilith has to define for herself her own sense of direction. And the third house is typically not doing that. That's why it's also the house of study. It's the house of learning, right? Formal learning. So this could be a person who's learned a lot about what they're supposed to be. This is a person who's very much caught up in the concept of things, but has to maybe sometimes learn how to also fluidly express themselves, how to do the things they are studying about, how to do the things they're claiming they understand, right? You can have people who are like, oh yeah, I know about women's liberation or whatever, but it's like, but are you living your life as a liberated woman? Are you embracing those ideals, or do you just talk about them, right? And again, that's why I said the third house is kind of interesting in that regard. Now, Lilith in the fourth house, well, the biggest thing that stood out to me was I think this idea of like denial of feelings. Lilith not wanting to admit she was bothered about being banished. So think of that thematically. If you go back to the other video that I did about the story, and that, you know, she was hurt. And Lilith in the fourth house, like Lilith didn't want to admit she was hurt because that would mean she's vulnerable. And, you know, sometimes people don't want to admit that they're vulnerable. You know, they want to think, oh, I got over that. I'm fine. I don't need anything. Now, familial ties or obligations or expectations can often prevent full expression. So if we're thinking of Lilith as eventually coming into her own power and understanding who she is and living in that way, but what we have to understand here is that when Lilith's in the fourth house, a person feels maybe more confined to the roots, people that they feel obligated to. And so, you know, let me give an example. It could be a woman whose conservative upbringing or expectations of modesty presents her from full sexual expression, right? This is someone who grows up thinking, oh, I have to be this way, or I have to do this. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you choose. But when things are imposed on you and you don't have the choice to do what you need to do, that causes an issue with your spirit, right? We are all individuals, no matter what we belong to culturally, through gender or racially or religious background, whatever you are, we all belong to some sector, something, or some identity. But at the end of the day, you're individuals. That's a group of people with a shared mindset, but they're individuals. And, so Lilith in the fourth house has to realize and peel back, what do I really feel? Or I thought I had to feel this way, but what way am I being held down, repressed by things that are ingrained in my upbringing? And there's nothing wrong with your upbringing, but we're talking about Lilith here, okay? And what that can mean in someone's chart. Now, Lilith in the fifth house can represent, once you get a person who's abandonment of responsibilities. Let's say example, if Lilith is heavy in this person's chart, if they had too many if they had too many responsibilities early on in life, this can cause I don't want to do this anymore. I don't need to do this anymore. Once they get a taste of freedom, then they're out. And remember, the fifth house is the house of pleasure. So Lilith here can indulge too much. Now, let's say you have a person with, what if they have Saturn and Pluto and Scorpio and Lilith and Scorpio in the, I'm just, just throwing this out. I don't know if this is, but let's say someone has that, or maybe it's squaring that, right? Maybe they have Lilith, in Taurus and squaring, it's opposing it. In the 11th house, okay? But Saturn and Pluto in the fifth house. Well, wow, this person can get really intense in activities that they enjoy, but also Lilith in the 11th house, where now we're dealing with this networking, people and groups, and having to always be around people, having to belong, but also always needing to have fun, and maybe not choosing the right people to be around, not choosing people to uplift you, but people who are going to give you that thrill that maybe you didn't have, or maybe you grew up feeling like you were repressed, or your parents were too strict or something like that. So Lilith in the fifth house has to just be careful of, like, yes, it's okay to enjoy life in a way that is uplifting for you and in a way that doesn't hurt anyone. But at the same time, Lilith in the fifth house can sometimes mean this person is too intricately involved in feeling good and always having to have fun and everything having to be, because too much of that, and like I said, for Lilith in the fifth house to really make an impact, there would have to be some aspects moving towards Lilith, a square opposition or planets conjunct Lilith, right? Something like that, that when the intense planets causing that type of reaction or causing that type of issue in the person. Lilith in the sixth house, so kind of like how I said, remember I said the Mercury house is, it's interesting, but I would say, I think with Lilith in the sixth house, you get a person who's too confined to service. They're very dutiful. They do everything that is required of them. Now, this would be the antithesis of Lilith, because we know in the myth, if you watch the other video, that Lilith didn't want to be submissive. Lilith wanted to go in her own way. Lilith wanted to kind of be equals with Adam, but there is this power dynamic, and you could argue, could both of them have worked better at making it work, right? You could argue that, but that's not what this video is about. The point being is that this person feels worthy. The thing with Lilith is about phases of worth, okay? And this makes this person feel worthy when they're doing something for others, or when they feel that, now again, the problem can be being too charitable, thinking the only way to earn someone's appreciation, validation, or love is through what you do for them, instead of just being, right? And instead of just being who you are. And of course, doing things for people isn't bad, but depending on the rest of the chart, this could mean that this person has issues with that. 12th house or 6th house, savior complex, worth is through what you give other people. But if you do too much of this, then you are, you're not able to receive yourself, right? If you're always putting energy out, where I'll do it. And you kind of give this, also you can give this exterior of, I don't need any help. I just help everybody else. And at the end of the day, most people do need help. We all need help in some way. It doesn't always mean we're helpless. And I think people have to understand those things, the fear of vulnerability, when we all have feelings, unless you don't have feelings. But if you don't have feelings, that's something you need to go talk to somebody. But this idea of also needing to feel like we don't need help. I don't need help. But it's like, it doesn't mean you're weak. It just means like sometimes if someone else can do something better than you can, that's okay. And if you need someone because something can't get done without them, that's okay to reach out and try to, get there. Now, that's not the same as being helpless. Now, Lilith in the 7th house, it can work either way. A lot of times you might assume, oh, well, does that mean the person's codependent? Now, again, you've seen in some videos, I'll say that's the pitfall of 7th house energy. If there are certain planets in the 7th house, or what we notice is a theme. All right. Now, what I would say here is it's about this person, they fight sometimes to understand partnership, to fight unions. It can actually be the opposite. If you remember, the 1st house, right, is about image and your self-image. The 7th house is about image in your relationship. And so sometimes this person has to understand fully what they are bringing, what they are offering to the relationship, what they are trying to obtain from the relationship, right? There's fears. Lilith can represent our fear, right? Because of her myth, right? So Lilith in the 7th house can be a person who actually fears relationships. This is, she or he could fear being in a committed relationship, fear that means that they don't have power. This could be a person who sabotaged their relationship, especially if there's certain placements in the chart representing a fear of vulnerability. So Lilith in the 7th house, they're fighting to understand what union, what partnership truly means and what it looks like. And this person can sometimes have early issues. Let's say they have, what if they have Lilith in Cancer, Mars in Cancer? Whoa, right? In early life, this could be a person who has had bad relationships, and that becomes their truth. And they feel like, well, my first relationship was bad, or, my last relationship was, bad or oppressive, or, it was negative, it was toxic. I'm not going forth with it, and if they have other, let's say the person has a lot of Libra in the chart somewhere, well, they value relationships, they value partnership in some capacity, but the Lilith effect there, especially if you look at the degree or what else is going on with Lilith, you can have a person who but they can't stay in one because they fear, they literally fear. And this is what I'm saying. Sometimes the things people describe as sign traits are actually a component of aspects, right? But sometimes you can see a person who fears that union. They fear true relationship because they feel like it's going to oppress them or it's going to tie them down too much. And they might not want that, right? or they fear that that's going to mean that they don't know who they are, or they fear that they're not, especially if you have a person with first house energy and Lilith in seventh house by itself. Well, this is already a person trying to really navigate the world on their own terms and identify themselves. And then you have this Lilith in the seventh house where there's a kind of repellent against wanting to, now again, it doesn't mean this person doesn't have relationships, but it can sometimes, you have to understand that astrology is not always out there. Think about how much some people relate to their moon, but they don't tell people that, right? That Lilith can represent just like the back of your mind. You could always fear. You could be the person that's been in a long-term relationship for 12 years, but you won't get married to the person, or you won't commit. You won't move in with them, right? There's a fear of like, I don't really want to come together with you because I'm not sure like what, how I can preserve my sense of self. Lilith in the eighth, typically with here, you want to understand your power. And your power is also internal. The eighth house is not always wielding its power, but it's internal power and how it builds itself up. And, sometimes you have to embrace your shadow side of the eighth house and dive deeper into those intense feelings because, you have to understand what those intense feelings are showing you about yourself. And sometimes intense feelings scare us. Why did I react that way? Why did I feel that way? Why do I not like that? Why do I not, why do I feel so strongly against this situation or this person? But sometimes there's a reason for it. It's not always negative. Or it doesn't always mean you're bad. It means you're picking up very strong vibrations and strong things, especially let's say if you have a person, Lilith in the eighth, moon's in the eighth as well. Well, you're highly in tune, you're highly intuitive. And so you have to actually embrace that instead of being afraid of it. Now, let me give another example. The person with Lilith in the eighth house. Well, let's say you want power because you felt disempowered earlier in life. Now, that could be a problem if you choose to wreck things. Because remember, Lilith was angry at one point. She wanted revenge, right? And so you have to understand that part and like learn to control how you are responding. We are not always controlling how we feel about something because we feel what we feel, which makes feelings and emotions interesting. But, you want to be careful because, you could also have people who repress themselves because of what they told were wrong. They were told what they were or how they responded or what they felt or embracing themselves or embracing their sexuality or embracing whatever was wrong. And so they repress themselves and then have to really dive deeper into, wait a minute, I believe these things about myself and I believe these things about power. I believe these things because someone told me, or it could be a person who's highly spiritual. They're intuitive, they're psychic, but they were told by their family, oh, you can't do that because, certain belief systems don't agree with psychics, but you're really gifted, right? So you actually have this power, but you're afraid to use it because you were told and it's been embedded in you. That's the biggest thing about the eighth house is that especially with Lilith, you're thinking of carefully examine any emotional responses to things that have been embedded in you. Yeah, because sometimes the things embedded in us, we got to pull back the layers and really say, wait a minute, is this really what I feel now? Like, the Lilith in the ninth house has to be careful of vices, of bad habits and things that you are drawn to that kind of can replace diving deeper into your feelings because you want the experience, okay? The kind of feeling of never being satisfied. Lilith in the ninth house, I'm never, someone could be saying, I'm never satisfied. I always want more. I always want more. I always want more. And the fear with being that and saying like, oh, I'm never satisfied. I always want more and more is that sometimes the person is struggling to really understand what they actually are seeking. Because remember I said the ninth house, again, there's plenty of things I could say about the ninth house. There's a whole video, but we also have to understand the purpose behind the ninth house is that all these journeys and all these, all this, sabbaticals and travel and, learning and knowledge and all of these things is to understand what you believe. Think about the ancient philosophers, right? Like you went on this journey to come back and have an epiphany, or you had an epiphany, you come back and now you understand life better or something like that. So when Lilith's in the ninth house, you want to be careful because you don't want to become so attached to things that are, seem like good ideas. I'm attached to the journey. You can have a person who's attached to the journey. They're attached to the process. They're attached to what's exciting, but they don't attach themselves to what they truly, truly, truly need in order to feel that level, that ninth house wisdom, that ninth house purpose, right? There could be the fear, also some people with Lilith in the ninth house of being held down, fear of, not being free, fear of if I give people too much control, if I give people too much access to me, then I'm not actually going to be able to freely do what I need to do. So you can sometimes, especially if you have a person, what if they have Venus in ninth house and Lilith, conjunct Lilith, or even square, any strong connection to that placement? Well, depends on the person, depends on the situation. You can have a person who's like you know, they love the thrill, but they ghost people a lot, right? Because they're afraid of like, or they only like the thrill of things. And then after that, they're like, that wasn't even worth it. So that's why I said purpose is really important when you have ninth house energy, period. But definitely Lilith. Lilith in the 10th house, again, it's one of those, there's some Lilith houses where it's kind of like odd how it comes about. Like I said, Lilith in the 3rd house is kind of strange in my opinion, like how it comes about because of what the house represents. But with Lilith in the 10th house, you know, this person can be out of touch with liberation. They follow everything in a rigid way to stay in line with expectations. There's a fear of going outside the confines of things. You know, this is why you see some people not really coming to their full self until they're older, because you've been, you know, and it's not just Lilith, but for so long people follow what they've been told to do, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it's helpful to have a basis for how you're supposed to start your life, of course. But you know, also give a person like who's consumed with power and prestige. If I can be successful, and if I can get people to respect me, and if I can get people to really like appreciate what I've done, then I can hide the fact that there's other things going on, or I can hide the fact that in my other part of my life I feel like I don't have any control, right? So 10th house energies, people sometimes, you know, all that energy funneling, especially with planets there, to prestige, to occupation, to a strong kind of work ethic to succeed. But it sometimes can be a cover for other things, where if the person has Lilith in the 10th house, well, you know, they need to understand fully, like, are you in that profession because your family told you to? Are you always using what you have, or trying to manipulate situations in order to be in your favor because you're kind of afraid that if you don't manipulate things, you're not going to get what you obtain and what you want? It gets deep, okay, in certain houses, and astrology gets rather deep as well. So that's something to keep in mind with the 10th house. Now again, some people might say, well, I haven't experienced that yet. Well, one, I always ask people, how old are you? Because if you haven't experienced certain things yet and you're in your early 20s, or you're a teenager or something, like, life is not even started fully yet, you know what I mean? Like, you have to go through the motions of life, and then you're going to start to see certain things pop up. Lilith in 11th, well, I think this one's pretty straightforward. I would say Lilith in 11th, there is a general feeling of like society doesn't accept or acknowledge you, or that you aren't really what you want to be. You know, this person could feel like, wow, people view me as this. Everybody wants me to be this. I really don't want to be this. You know, a person can grow up a socialite, but they really want to go live remotely in the woods and be left alone, and live near a river and live a kind of like stress-free life. But you can't, because people, and the thing that's really hard sometimes with 11th house energy is any house that you're getting a lot of attention, even 1st house, any house that you're getting a lot of attention, you're going to typically want to stay there, especially in society where everybody is consuming social media and likes, and, you know, stunting for the online likes and all that. In that, people are going to go where they feel validated. But sometimes being validated by a bunch of strangers, or being validated by people who don't vibe with you, or being validated by people who don't care about your journey, it's useless. Don't get me wrong. Having people who are fans, or having people who actually appreciate what you do, is different than having a bunch of likes. And I think some people don't understand that. And that's why some people get so depressed, because they're like, oh, I have all these likes. But have you formed real relationships with people? Because you'll have people who start businesses and they're like, well, wait, I have all these followers. But are those followers people you genuinely have connections with, right? Like, there's something just to keep in mind of like, people can like anything. It doesn't cost money to follow somebody on social media. It doesn't cost money to like someone, right? So how do you also leverage relationships and being around and being involved and responsive and in communication with like-minded people? There's the difference. You know, I've always said with my platform, I want like-minded people who are on a real spiritual journey, and who are, you know, reflective, and who do the work on themselves to find my content, because that's the type of people I'm trying to attract and draw. People who want instant results, people who want people to do everything for them, people who want instant answers, that's not going to vibe well with me, right? So I think Lilith in 11th house is about you trying to attract the right attention, because you can attract people who want you or want to be involved in you. They want to rub elbows with you. They want to be in your space. They want to be in your groups. They want to be around you. But are these people actually there rooting for you? Are these people there actually helping you in a way that solidifies your ability to be successful? Or are they there just to be in association with you? They, Lilith in the 11th house, your associations can be your downfall. Being careful of that. Now, Lilith in the 12th house, it's kind of sink or swim energy. Now, first of all, when I say that, think about the fact of what? That's a water house, Neptunian, Pisces, 12th house energy. Sometimes the problem here with these people is like, by saying sink or swim, it's like you have to navigate your true path. And what I say true path is that things in the 12th house, again, can get murky. And they can be great when you feel that you can use that murkiness to create vision and imagination. But again, when things get murky, sometimes things do not go the way they're supposed to go, or there could be struggles. So for example, if you Lilith in the 12th house, you may have experiences of feeling like not listened to or not believed. Think about Lilith's journey, right? So you have 12th house energy, especially if you have anything conjuncting Lilith, squaring Lilith, conjuncting in that house, depending on what it is. So when I say conjunct Lilith, I don't mean like, it's typically to be a planet that can stunt your expression, or somehow stunt something that you need. And that's going to be the issue. There's not a problem with something conjunct to Lilith, but if we know what Lilith means, it does mean pay attention to that. So with Lilith in the 12th house, you have to really understand more of your self-awareness of what it is that you are trying to become and what you're trying to be. It's very easy with Lilith in the 12th house to become a shapeshifter. And that's a very typical Neptunian energy, but even worse, because what could have been the worst thing to happen? Lilith never left. Lilith stayed there. Lilith didn't demand that she, have her own, say. Lilith did not assert herself. If Lilith did not do those things, then Lilith would never have been able to kind of become this kind of empowerment, empower herself and be the symbol, this feminine archetype symbol of empowerment. And so with 12th house energy, it can get lost in the sauce. I've said this before. Whatever you're good with, whatever in the 12th house is meaningful to you. And if it starts to get too confusing, bring it out. Bring it out. People who are spiritual, talk about it. Do something about it. People who have really intense dreams, journal it. Tell somebody what you dreamt about, right? Look, like the 12th house is the link. Now, it's the gateway, right? There's the gateway to spirituality through the house, that last house, right? Let's be honest here. But when you have placements there and we live on Earth, that is where you will start to see some things kind of need to be addressed, because we're here on Earth. So how do we make what we are experiencing real on Earth? But some things in the 12th house are meant to stay in the 12th house, and I'm just leave it at that. But that's what I'm saying with the 12th, Lilith and 12th house. You can have situations of being shamed a lot, people not believing you because you don't believe in yourself. And so that's why it's so important with 12th house energy to empower yourself, right? And not to let people morph you into what they want you to be. Because sometimes 12th house energy doesn't care. And I think that's what people don't understand. It's like, why didn't this person do this? Why didn't they do it like that? Why didn't they do this? And really, like, they don't care, because sometimes people who are Piscean in nature, Neptunian in nature, maybe Neptune's their chart ruler, or they have 12th house placements, they know the truth from the other side, or they sense things. So they might not move as fast as you do, because they're like, oh, I already know what's going to happen, or, it'll be okay in 2 years. But you, right? And so it's a struggle, because you have to understand that it's easy to get lost in that. But you also have to prove to the world what you can do. You don't want to shortcut yourself out of something you can have quicker, because you just simply know, or you understand things in a deeper way, right? So again, I hope that makes sense. But with Lilith in the 12th house, it's literally about not just about empowering yourself. It's about understanding your vision of what you are and how that's going to translate to the world in front of you. It's not about relaxing and staying back and saying, well, it's okay if they do that. It's okay if they think that about me. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, to a certain extent, but you also have to define yourself, which is the key thing here for Lilith in the 12th house.